A young Englishman carries the faith he inherited from his mother and sets off to the Amazon, where he encounters a community marked by losses and hope. Among rivers that conceal secrets and seeds that hold memories, different destinies intertwine in a journey of love, faith, and rebirth. The chapel bell resonated in the distance as Edward Collins placed the small, worn-covered Bible into the inside pocket of his coat. His fingers touched the handwritten dedication from his mother years ago. "Go where love takes you, and God will be your compass." The words, although faded by time, remained vivid in his heart. The 24-year-old took one last look at the modest room that had been his home during his years of theological study in London. In the corner, the old piano his father used to play was gathering dust. Since Elizabeth Collins had passed away, taken by a tropical fever contracted during a mission in Africa, music rarely filled that home. Edward was only 8 years old when he last saw his mother, yet he carried the echo of her voice and the firmness of her faith as if they were anchors in a sea of uncertainties. "Is it really decided?" asked his father from the doorway, his shoulders hunched by the weight of the years and loneliness. Edward nodded, adjusting his tie. "Mom used to say there are places in the world where God's love still needs to be sown," he replied, trying to disguise the tremor in his voice. "I feel that the Amazon is that place for me." The pianist approached and adjusted his son's collar with hands that once danced over ivory keys, but now trembled slightly. "She would be proud," he whispered. "Just come back home someday, yes." Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, the sun rose over the dark waters of a winding river that snaked through the dense forest. Yara woke to the song of birds, as she did every morning since she could remember. At 21 years old, she knew every sound of the forest as if it were a familiar song. Sitting at the door of the small wooden and straw hut, she separated colorful seeds into small fiber baskets that she had woven herself. Her agile fingers worked quickly, transforming simple elements of nature into necklaces and bracelets of singular beauty. Each piece seemed to tell a story, just as the lines on her young face silently narrated her own struggles. "Already working so early?" The voice of Taina, her 45-year-old aunt, emerged from behind her. The older woman placed a bowl of hot porridge beside her. "The village market is tomorrow," Yara replied without interrupting her work. "I need to finish these necklaces if we want to buy flour and fishing hooks." Taina sighed, sitting next to her niece. The older woman's calloused hands rested on Yara's shoulders. "Your father would be proud to see how you take care of all of us since he—" Taina didn't complete the sentence. It wasn't necessary. Yara closed her eyes for a moment. The memory of the empty boat found after the storm still appeared in her dreams. 5 years had passed, but the wound remained open as if the river had taken a part of her along with her father. "Do you think he sees us from somewhere?" Yara asked softly, resuming her work with the seeds. "The waters keep secrets, but the sky keeps the souls." Taina replied with the wisdom of someone who grew up between ancient legends and Christian prayers that intertwined in the daily life of the riverside community. "He is where there is no more pain." The morning advanced while, a few kilometers away, a small boat cut through the river's waters. On board, Edward tried to steady himself, awkward with the vessel's sway. Beside him, Pastor Elias, a middle-aged man with skin weathered by the Amazonian sun, smiled at the young missionary's inexperience. "You'll need sturdier legs around here, my son," Elias commented, adjusting the faded cap that protected his partially bald head. "The river is our only path, and at times, our only challenge." Edward nodded, gripping the edge of the boat while observing the vast green expanse stretching in all directions. It was so different from London. There were no buildings, no rushing crowds, no constant creaking of trams. Only the whisper of the forest and the gentle sway of the waters. "I remember my mother writing about the colors of Africa," he remarked, adjusting his glasses that insisted on sliding down his sweaty nose. "She said God painted some places with more attention than others. I bet she never saw this here." Elias laughed, a deep sound that seemed to blend with the forest's noises. "Every community has its own needs," the elder pastor explained. "We are taking supplies for the school, basic medicines, and some tools. But the most important thing we offer is presence. Many come to the Amazon to take something, few come to give. The boat finally approached a small clearing on the riverbank. A group of children ran towards the makeshift dock, waving and shouting words Edward still didn't understand. His boots touched the damp ground uncertainly, but his heart was as light as it hadn't been in a long time. It was on that first day that Edward caught a glimpse of Yara for the first time. She was standing apart from the group, watching him with curiosity as he awkwardly tried to communicate with the children surrounding him. Something about the way she held herself discreet yet present captured his attention. During the following week, Edward dedicated himself to getting to know the community. He helped organize the books in the small school, assisted with the distribution of medicines, and tried to learn words in Portuguese and the local language. At night, he sat with Pastor Elias to read passages from the Bible by lantern light. On a particularly hot afternoon, Edward found a torn fishing net in the community storage. Determined, he decided to fix it, vaguely recalling the explanations about knots he had received during the boat trip. "That's not how you do it," a soft voice commented behind him. Edward turned, surprised. Yara was standing at the door with a small basket of seeds in her arms. The afternoon sun created a golden halo around her, and for a moment the young Englishman forgot what he was doing. "I was trying to help," he replied in hesitant Portuguese. Yara approached, placing the basket on the beaten earth floor. She sat down beside him and took the net into her hands. "You fasten it like this, see," she explained, demonstrating the movement with nimble fingers that danced among the threads with a precision that fascinated Edward. He watched closely, not just the technique, but the patience with which she worked. There was a tranquility in her gestures that contrasted with the haste he was accustomed to in London. "Perhaps I need to learn more from you than teach," Edward commented with a shy smile. Yara's eyes briefly met his before returning to the net. A small smile curved her lips. "We all have something to teach and something to learn," she replied. "My father used to say that when two rivers meet, both change their course." From that day on, small encounters gradually turned into longer conversations. Edward taught her words in English. Yara showed him how to identify medicinal plants and avoid poisonous ones. She laughed at his heavy accent. He admired the ease with which she created beauty from the simplest seeds. The weeks turned into months. Edward no longer felt like a foreigner. His body had adapted to the heat, his hands had acquired new calluses, and his heart beat to the slower rhythm of river life. On a starry night, sitting by the river while the other villagers had already gone to bed, Edward found the courage to share something he rarely mentioned. "I lost my mother early," he said, looking at the reflection of the moon in the dark waters. "Sometimes I feel like part of me is still searching for her." Yara remained silent for a moment. Her fingers touched the necklace of red seeds she wore, a legacy from her grandmother. Finally, she replied, "I also look for my father in the river every morning, but perhaps God keeps our loved ones in a place where there is no more pain." Edward turned to look at her. There was so much in common between them: the loss, the faith, the determination to move forward carrying the legacy of those who have departed. In that moment, something blossomed between them, silent and deep like the roots of the ancient trees surrounding them. Life was following its peaceful course when an unexpected letter reached Edward's hands. His missionary visa needed urgent renewal in the capital, or he would be forced to leave the country. Pastor Elias, concerned, organized his immediate departure. "I'll be back in 2 weeks at the most," Edward assured the older friend, while hastily packing his backpack. "And Yara?" Elias asked, well aware of the bond that had formed between the two. Edward hesitated, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I need to write something for her. I can't just leave." That night, by the dim light of a candle, Edward wrote with an open heart. "Dear Yara, I have been called to the capital to resolve documentation matters. It's a sudden departure, but not a farewell. I will return because the love God has given us knows no boundaries. Keep me in your prayers as I will keep you in mine. With affection, Edward." The next morning, before dawn, he handed the letter to a canoeist who traveled to the community. With a heavy heart but confident of his return, Edward set off for the capital. Fate, however, had other plans. During the crowded river journey, the canoeist lost the envelope which slipped between the luggage and fell into the waters unnoticed. Edward's message, like so many secrets of the forest, was carried away by the current. Days passed. Yara, without news, struggled against the growing feeling of abandonment. Taina's words echoed in her ears. Foreigners come and go like the rainy season. One cannot trust promises that cross oceans. Meanwhile, in the city, Edward faced endless bureaucracy. What should have taken days turned into agonizing weeks. Each night away from the forest, and Yara was a trial of his patience. "Have faith, son," advised the mission worker who hosted him. "Everything has its time." Almost 3 months passed before Edward finally obtained the necessary documents. With his heart racing with the anticipation of reuniting, he returned to the port to catch the boat that would take him back. It was then he received the devastating news. The community had moved. Illegal invaders threatened the lands, and the families had gone upriver, settling in a more isolated area. "No one goes there now," the boatman explained, shaking his head. "It's in disputed territory. Too dangerous." "I need to find them," Edward insisted. "Is there any guide who can lead me?" The man laughed bitterly. "For no money, Englishman. Those who know the way don't want trouble with the invaders." That night, in his small lodging, Edward opened his mother's Bible. His eyes fell on the family dedication. "Go where love takes you, and God will be your compass." Early the next morning, with a backpack containing only the essentials, Edward began his journey on foot. He carried a rudimentary map drawn by an old resident who sympathized with his resolve, and the conviction of finding the way to Yara. The first days were the easiest. The trail was clear, and the vegetation still allowed for relatively comfortable passage. Edward walked at dawn and rested during the hottest hours, resuming his journey in the afternoon until nightfall. On the 4th day, the rain began. It wasn't an ordinary rain, but an Amazonian downpour that turned the ground to mud and the streams into violent torrents. Soaked to the bone, Edward pressed on, each step a battle against the terrain that seemed to swallow him. At night, precariously sheltered under a large palm leaf, he shivered with cold while trying to light a fire with wet wood. His thoughts constantly returned to Yara. Was she well? Did she think he had abandoned her deliberately? "Lord," he murmured in the darkness, "guide me as you guide the waters of the river." In the new village, Yara tried to adapt to the change. The community had settled in a distant clearing where the river made a sharp turn. The houses were smaller, hastily erected, and many belongings were left behind. "You need to forget that missionary," advised Taina while they helped build the new school. "He's probably returned to his land." Yara did not respond. Her hands continued to create beauty. Necklaces, baskets, small objects that she brought to life with the same dedication as always. But her eyes often wandered toward the river, as if expecting to see a familiar boat appear at the water's bend. At night, when everyone slept, she picked up an unfinished necklace, the one she had started making for Edward before he left. The red seeds, symbolizing protection in her people's tradition, awaited being united. If he wanted to say goodbye, he would have found a way, an inner voice told her. Yet, something deeper than reason kept a spark of hope alive. In the forest, Edward faced his 7th day of walking. The fever that had struck him the night before had not yet completely subsided. His skin burned, and each step required superhuman effort. The scratches on his arms and face, inflicted by thorns and branches, stung under the relentless sun. Lost in his struggle, he barely noticed when the vegetation began to clear. It was the sound of children's voices that brought him back to reality. Blinking to wipe the sweat from his eyes, Edward glimpsed a clearing ahead. Children played on the riverbank, chasing each other amid laughter. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating, a mirage created by exhaustion and fever. Then one of the girls noticed his presence and shouted something to the others. Edward tried to smile, but his legs gave way. He collapsed onto his knees in the mud, his trembling hands searching for something in the inner pocket of his soaked shirt, the crumpled draft of the letter he had written to Yara, the only copy he kept with him. The girl ran toward the village, shouting about a white man with hurt feet and tear-filled eyes. The commotion drew the attention of the adults, who emerged at the edge of the clearing, wary. It was then that Edward saw her. Yara emerged from one of the huts, the unfinished necklace of seeds still in her hands. Her eyes scanned the kneeling figure in the distance, and something in her heart recognized him before her mind even processed the information. Time seemed to freeze as she ran to him, with Tena calling her to be cautious. Yara ignored the warnings, her bare feet barely touching the muddy ground. When she finally reached Edward, she stopped a few steps away. He lifted his face, his drenched hair plastered to his forehead, his chapped lips trying to form words lost in emotion. With trembling fingers, he extended the crumpled paper. "I never left without a word," he managed to say, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I always wanted to return." Yara took the paper, her eyes scanning the words stained by moisture. Tears welled up, not of pain, but of profound relief that washed away months of doubt and loneliness. "I thought you had forgotten me," she whispered. Edward managed to stand, unsteady. His hands found hers, uniting over the worn paper. "To forget you would be to forget what God made blossom in me." The quiet scene touched even the most skeptical in the community. Tena, who had always doubted the foreigner's intentions, slowly approached. Her experienced eyes assessed the state of the young man, injured, exhausted, but with a look she recognized well. "If the rivers brought him here on foot," the older woman said, "then maybe his heart truly is rooted." Edward was taken to the infirmary hut, where his wounds were treated with traditional herbs and ointments. The fever slowly subsided, while Yara remained at his side, completing the necklace of red seeds she had started months before. When he finally regained his strength, he shared his story with the community gathered around the campfire. He spoke of the bureaucracy in the city, the news of the village's move, and his decision to make his way on foot when no guide was willing to bring him. "My mother used to say that true love builds bridges where there are no paths," he concluded, looking at Yara by his side. Pastor Elias, who had arrived days later by a longer route, smiled to see how God had interwoven those lives in unexpected ways. 4 years passed since then. The community's small school transformed into a bilingual education center where Edward and Yara worked side by side. The children learned both the Indigenous language and Portuguese, preserving local traditions while preparing for the challenges of the modern world. Edward had become an integral part of the community. His hands, once clumsy, now wove baskets and mended nets skillfully. His Portuguese flowed naturally, interspersed with words from the local language. In their simple riverside hut, 2 treasures held a place of honor: Yara's grandmother's seed necklace and the worn little Bible that belonged to Edward's mother. 2 symbols of different heritages that came together under the same purpose. On Sunday afternoons, after services at the small chapel they had built together, Edward often sat with the community's elders, recording their stories and wisdom. Yara, in turn, taught the children the art of turning seeds into beauty, a metaphor for the work they accomplished together. "Do you believe God planned all this?" Yara asked one evening as they watched the stars reflected in the river. Edward smiled, holding her hand affectionately. "My mother said God would be my compass," he replied softly. "Now I understand she was right. Love brought me to you across oceans and forests." "And love keeps us here," Yara completed, "like roots intertwining beneath the earth." The Amazon night breeze cradled their words, carrying them upriver, where the forest's mysteries held countless stories of faith, perseverance, and love that transcended borders.